He's back into it in Chester. Here's El Senior. Yes!
The center back, Jacob Glesnes.
He's going. Yes! Oh, my God! What a goal! And that will do it! One of the best comebacks in recent years. 3 unanswered by the Union. And they go into the Gold Cup break, winning it 3-2.
Hello and welcome to the Free Kick Podcast. My name is Todd. Well, after the Union lost the home opener disappointingly against Inter Miami, they go down to Atlanta and beat up on them 3-0 in the first leg of CCL quarterfinals. And after a big performance from Andre Blake, Kasper Schmeichel, and Sergio Santos, we will now see the Union turn their attention to NYCFC for their third MLS game, which we all know the Union have not had a grade of success against NYCFC. But joining me to preview this Union versus NYCFC game is a guy who has a long history calling soccer games, NFL, NBA, NHL games on ESPN Deportes. It doesn't matter what sport it is. He's probably called it at least once. He's been the Spanish commentator for NYCFC since 2015. He is Mr. Roberto Abramowitz. How are you, Roberto?
I'm good. I was about to ask you, what language are we doing this in?
Hey, I'm sure, like you said, well, like I said, right, and we were talking before this, you are on the call for the Spanish side of things for NYCFC, so I'm sure there are probably some listeners that are listening to this podcast that do understand Spanish, but me, not so much. So, Roberto, whatever, you can say whatever you want in Spanish. I'm like, yeah, sounds good to me. So, but I just want to get into your background a little bit. So like I said, you've called pretty much anything that there is sports-wise. And if people go onto your website, they'll see everything that you've called. First starting in 1978, calling MISL soccer games for indoor soccer juggernauts, the New York Arrows. So growing up, I'm from Maryland. My parents, I remember they took my sister and I to a bunch of Baltimore Blast games in the early 2000s. And the one thing that sticks out to me is going to these games, like listening to the old heads that you can tell that went to the games in the 70s and 80s, talking about two absolute legends that played for the New York Arrows, which were Steve Žungul and Branko Šegota. Both of them, like I said, played for the New York Arrows. So there's a throwback for people that are a fan of the indoor game. But like I said, you were the color commentator for the Arrows back in the day. You had front row seats to watch these two incredible players. Just what are your thoughts on seeing these two soccer legends?
Well, it's an interesting way to start this off. I got to think back to 1978 now. I was in college still. I was still in Brooklyn College. I was in my sophomore year when that happened. And it was a whole interesting dynamic to see this sport start and grow. The first game was against the Cincinnati Kids, which was owned by Pete Rose, of all people. And the atmosphere inside Nassau Coliseum was electric. And then we really didn't know much about how good Steve Žungul was going to be or how good Branko Šegota was going to be. We knew that Shep Messing was in goal, and he was really, the mainstay of the team as it started out. He was a big drawing card, being, such a great player for the Cosmos and all that. It was one of those things that it was odd, to see this with basically it was a hockey rink with grass on top of it and goals cut out of the end zone. And it was fun and it was exciting and it was very different from the outdoor game, mind you. But it was great. And Žungul turned out to be a fantastic player indoors, Šegota as well. Žungul basically he didn't break, but he, what's the word I'm looking for, had or set all the indoor records for goals and everything in that league. And then they would play outdoors with the Rochester Lancers. So half the team, and Greg Popovich was the coach of the team, and he was also the coach of the Lancers. So they'd play indoors during the summer or during the winter, and then they would play outdoors during the warm weather. And and Rochester was, a very decent team as well. Back in the day. So, that was great. It was a great experience for me to start off. And from there, I basically wound up going into the Spanish world as opposed to staying in the English world because I grew up bilingually. I grew up in Mexico City. So it was a different, I wasn't your normal, just New York kid. I'm still not normal.
Hey, absolutely. But I thought I would throw you a curveball, and I was like, oh, wow. Like looking and seeing that you called indoor soccer games, that's how you got your career started. I was like, I know there are some people that listen to this podcast. I've talked about the Harrisburg Heat a little bit on the podcast when I first started, and about former Philadelphia Union players that have played for the Heat over the years. And so I was like, this is pretty interesting. I've got to bring up the errors and those two great players. So let's go ahead and switch topics to NYCFC and discuss their game against Cincinnati. Well, Cincinnati, they continue to make history in MLS, the wrong history, we shall say, by conceding 5 set-piece goals, the first team to ever do that. And they go on to lose 5-0 to NYCFC. NYCFC, in my opinion, they completely dominated the game in shots, possession, tackles, duels won, every important stat that's basically going to lead a team to a win. Just what are your big takeaways from this game for NYCFC?
It was really a good game for them, obviously. You know, they wind up winning 5-0. There's still things that they've got to get better and that we wonder about. As you said, you know, they dominated in all the statistical categories and they dominated on the field. Sometimes stats don't tell the whole story. The one stat, for instance, that I don't use on my broadcast, for instance, is possession, because possession is a very misused stat. Sometimes, or a lot of people wind up using it to see which team really dominated a game. And it's not a real telltale if that's the case or not. Sometimes it does tell that story, but most often it doesn't, because a lot of teams, especially when you're playing teams that are very strong, will set up defensively on purpose, and they will give away the possession. This is their strategy. Their strategy is to let them have the possession, try to turn them over either at midfield or in the final third, and then counterattack and get them in odd man situations. So sometimes you'll see teams have 70% possession and people will say, wow, they really dominated. Well, that was because the defensive team wanted them to do that, because they figured that they would be able to stop them and they'd be able to catch them on the counter. And so when I look at stats, I look at that. But in this case, this game was a one-goal game going into the second half. And then New York City was just basically between good and lucky. And sometimes you have to be lucky to be good. And they were able to convert chances, and in a lot of games wouldn't go in. But in this case, they did. And now they have over, 5 games over Cincinnati? The goal scoring difference is 20-4.
Yeah.
So New York City has had their way. It's the second time that they've scored 5 goals against Cincinnati in the game. As far as the shutout is concerned, Sean Johnson made 3 excellent saves, 2 in one sequence in the second half. That were point blank, reaction saves that were great. But Cincinnati also wasn't exactly the same team that played against Nashville. And they tied 2-2 over in Nashville. They had a 2-goal lead and then they blew it. So over here, they never had a lead and then they got blown out. But Lutra Costa is a really important player, and they don't have the type of depth that New York City has. New York City is probably one of the more complete teams in MLS as far as player number 1 to player 29. If that's how far they go. And Cincinnati is the opposite of that. And so when you lose a player of the quality of Lutra Costa, who was so instrumental in playing so well and setting up the goals and scoring a goal and, you know, and being important for Cincinnati, and he's out of the game because he had what I believe was an accident at home and wasn't able to come to the game. So they really, really missed him. They missed what he can do in the middle of the field and the control he has over the ball. And, you know, and those sort of things start snowballing when you don't have a guy like that. And also before the game, they lost their starting goalie because it was supposed to be Titan who was supposed to start. And he had a wonderful, wonderful game for Cincinnati. The only reason they didn't get blown out by Nashville was because he was sensational in that game. But he was in the starting lineup, but somehow he came out ill or injured himself. I think he had what they said, because they didn't say anything officially. I read it like the next day. Sometimes they just don't give us any information. You just see how much fun that is. It's not the NFL. And so all of a sudden, Cody Cropper was the goalie. And we didn't realize it until about 10 minutes into the game. And I was like, since when did Titan go blonde? And I was like, wait, that's not him. And I'm looking around, and then all of a sudden, finally, it came up on our stats, on our live stats, that they had a new goalie. But in the starting lineup, it was Titan. So there's a big drop off from Titan to Cropper, and that was probably part of the influence in the game and why the scoreline wind up being 5-0.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about snowballing effects where you don't find out things till last minute in MLS. And your podcast that you're on with the NYCFC guys, you guys talked a little bit about Taty Castellanos potentially going to Palmeiras over in Brazil. Do you really believe that his days are numbered in NYCFC, or do you think this is just him just trying to get more money from New York?
I don't think it's really him. It was really Palmeiras, and the press down there is just, it's insanity. Having lived in Mexico, I know how the press is, and I've seen the press in Brazil do crazy stuff, just like you may have seen the press in England, that they can be a little bit nuts over there with how they cover their teams. And so out of Brazil, Palmeiras, which is in Sao Paulo, there was a lot of rumors, and every day a new rumor would come up, and everybody would just run with the rumor. Now, I had very, very good sources on both sides on this story. And even though all these rumors were coming out and everything was crazy, I knew that there was no new news. And so there was nothing to put on. I was getting stuff on my Twitter at Rob Abramowitz all the time, with people saying, well, we've just heard this, and that Taty didn't train today, and Taty wanted out, and he stormed out, and all these things. And I'm just like, that's not true. That didn't happen. I mean, seriously, not happen. So I'm getting stories stories being reported on huge newspapers in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, on, very respectable websites and all that. Taty Castellano storms out, demands a trade and the whole thing. And I'm just like, and then I'm getting video from New York City FC of the training that day. And here he is playing around with Maxi Morales. He's putting on sunblock, and Maxi walks by and he accidentally on purpose sprays him. And Maxi walks the other way, and he's like, and he sprays him again. And I'm like, what are these people talking about? Where are they getting these stories? Because it just turned out to be absolutely not true. Now, does Taty want more money and all of that? There's, based on the sourcing I've been able to get, yes, they're negotiating a new contract with New York City. And was there a real attempt by Palmeiras to get Taty Castellanos? Yes, but they just didn't have enough money to satisfy what New York City would have wanted to sell him. Reason being, so let's say his value right now is somewhere, and this is a guess, this isn't real numbers. Let's say his real value is somewhere between $5 and $6 million, okay? And for what I heard, Palmeiras is offering about $4 million for X percentage of the value of the player. So is it 80%, 90%, 50%? We don't know, but they offered $4 million. New York City, without another striker, because Eber doesn't come back until maybe June, okay, most likely June, they're in no hurry to sell him. So if you desperately want him, right, you're going to have to overpay. Okay, so if they're coming to New York City and they're saying, hey, we'll give you $10 million for him, then, you start looking at that and going, you know what, we can get $10 million for him, and then we'll go on the open market in MLS or somewhere within CFG, and we'll bring somebody in. And, that they'll play. We'll bring back Patrick Mullins, let's say, okay, and he'll be our striker until Ever gets back. Yeah. You'll do something like that, right? You'll put a patch together. Okay. But they just weren't offering enough money to be worth New York City's time to be able to do this.
Yeah.
And so there was no incentive for New York City to do this deal whatsoever, although there is incentive for Taty Castellanos to get a new contract. And if you look at him and, for instance, Jesus Medina, so Taty's earning somewhere, based on the 2019 Players Report, somewhere like $280,000 a year. Okay, and then you're getting Jesus Medina earning $750, and you see, the level of both players and who's playing better and who's more important to the team, et cetera. You can understand why Taty Castellanos might want some more money.
Absolutely.
And New York City wants him. The team really likes him. He's told me that he loves the team. He loves the coaching staff. Okay, so there's a mutual admiration society between both. And Ronny Delia told me before the game in Chester against DC United, because I went up to call the game up there, and he told me the only time we've been able to see anybody in person for the past year, and we chatted for a long time. And he told me, we love him. We want him here for years. We wanted him at least another 2 years. So the chances of him going to Palmeiras, unless they were going to absolutely overpay, were really, really slim. Now, is he going to get more money? Yes. Hopefully he gets what he wants and New York City can afford, and everybody's happy, and he winds up scoring a lot of goals for New York City.
Yeah, he does. He's a very, very intriguing player. I know he's represented the Argentinian U23s a couple of times, and when you're Argentina's no slouch, whether it's the national team, the U23s, they have very, very talented players. And I know people give slack to people all the time playing in MLS. Like, you're never going to play for your national team, or you're never going to get exposure playing in MLS. Like, MLS is getting better and better. And he was at NYCFC and he got caught up into the U23s. Like, he's a very, very talented player. And him and Maxi Morales are the two players I hate watching the Philadelphia Union having to play, and I'm sure we'll talk about Maxi in a little bit here, because always a thorn in his side, and especially Castellanos. He's so clever with the ball. He knows what he's doing. If he knows he's going to get fouled, he's going to draw that player, and Jose Martinez is one of those players for the Union that I worry about. That is a guy who's a hot head, and Castellanos might say, look, let's try to get an early yellow card on you, Jose, so you can get a red card in this game. Taty's that clever. So I am intrigued by that matchup, and I'm really hoping that Castellanos doesn't spoil it for the Union, but I don't know. We'll talk about the game a little bit later, but I do want to go ahead and talk about Ronny Delia real quick. Last season, we know New York City sit in fourth place. It's early in MLS. Last season, after 2019, they finished in first place. Last season, they come in fifth place. Coach Ronny's first year in charge at NYCFC, and I've got to imagine it was not the way that he thought his MLS season would go, where they had no home games in Yankee Stadium. They're playing at Red Bull Arena to come into a new country, a new team. COVID completely messes up everybody's plan, but especially for a brand new coach who, let's face it, right, probably didn't get to get some of the players that he wanted in 2020 because of COVID, and who knew what the transfer market was going to look like with money and everything. And like I said, not playing at Yankee Stadium, not having that money coming in from concessions, from fans going to the stadium, that's a big blow. And I think, in my opinion, that Coach Ronny, I thought he coached really, really well last season to get that team in fifth place with, like I said, probably some players that he probably had ideas of bringing some new players, and he had the roster that he had. But now we're going into year two for Coach Delia. What are your expectations for him this season?
I think the hardest part for Ronny Delia was the beginning of the season, especially after they played in CONCACAF. And their first game, they wind up winning 5-2 on the road. And so the expectations were, wow, we're going to be able to score goals in bunches. And then all of a sudden they went through a real drought. I mean, through the Champions League and then through the first few games of the season. And the team just couldn't find the back of the net. They tried different formations. He wasn't happy with the 3-4-3 or 3-5-2 that sometimes they played with wingbacks. That it was a very successful formation with Dormitorent. But with him, it just somehow it didn't work. They were allowing too many opportunities, exposing themselves at the back. So that was an issue. And so until he finally got things settled down, and then he settled on Eber being a striker. Taty was the odd man out, and he was on the bench. They had Medina, Tajiri Shradi, Mitrica for a while. So, and those guys, underperformed offensively. Eber was having issues scoring goals the way he had the year previous. So there was a lot of things going on. But then, little by little, they settled and they started to get better and more consistent. And towards the end of the year, they started scoring goals in bunches. So things got better. Sadly, Eber got hurt, and Taty came back in. And although he wasn't able to score goals early, then later on he started and finished the season with 6 goals, but on an upswing and playing very, very well. Playing in Red Bull Arena, there are advantages and disadvantages. You're going to play without a crowd. Doesn't matter really where you play, but Red Bull Arena is just a fantastic stadium. The surface is great. The sight lines, everything is first class in that place. So I know that the team didn't mind really playing there. The fans minded. The fans really had an issue. But without any fans present, then, that didn't make much of a difference. This year, the team is going to play supposedly as many as 8 games at Red Bull Arena. They're going to play 9 games at Yankee Stadium. The one thing I will correct you on is that as far as New York City getting concessions and money in concessions and all that, it's very little. Basically, the Yankees absorb it all. So they're renters there, and they know that they're renters there. Hence why, the team is so desperate to build a stadium in the city. And, that's a slow process in New York. It's not like in other places where, like in Fort Lauderdale, where they knocked down Lockhart and built up their new stadium in 9 months. I mean, that is insanity. In New York, it's going to take 3 years, if not 4, once they get the permits to start building it. It's a different ballgame for some reason. And but look, New York City, didn't matter really where they played. They started playing very well towards the end of the season, and it was a shame that they wind up losing in a shootout and a penalty shootout to Orlando, because they deserved to win that game. They were the better team.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. A lot better team on the day. But let's go ahead and focus on this Philadelphia Union versus New York City game for the remainder of the podcast. And as I mentioned earlier, NYCFC leads the all-time series against the Union with 8 wins, 1 draw, 4 losses. And New York City is 3-3 at Subaru Park, with the last win coming in 2019 on decision day, in which they went on to win that game 2-1. And when you look at the current list of Union players, Corey Burke, Elsinio, Ali Bedoya, and Kasper Schmelko, those are the only players on the Union's current roster that have goals against New York City. Well, we know Elsinio is not going to be playing against NYCFC because he's out with a groin injury. And so I am kind of happy that we're recording this podcast now, because right after you messaged me, I just got done with Jim Curtin's pre-game press conference, and he mentioned that Elsinio got an injection. He has a small tear in his groin. He's going to be out for 2 weeks, and then they're going to reassess whether he needs surgery, which will then put him out longer, or can he tolerate the pain and then get surgery at the end of the season. So Elsinio looks like he's going to be out for a very, very long time.
Oh, that's a shame. I love watching him play. I really do. He is absolutely fantastic. And I remember how many times he tortured Ronald Matarrita when he was part of New York City FC. He got Matarrita to get a red card in one of the games in Philadelphia, as a matter of fact. So, I enjoy watching him play. He's got such crazy mad skill and such a brilliant player. And you don't want to see, even as a New York City broadcaster, I mean, I want to see good games, and I want to see players that entertain, that make the game better, that's going to help us grow the game here in the United States. Yes, and so when you're missing somebody of the quality of Insigne, it's never good for the game.
Jim also mentioned that this game he's going to rotate his starting lineup. He said expected 4 changes. And so when I did my notes before I heard all that, I had a completely different lineup in mind than when Jim mentioned, we're going to rotate 3 to 4 guys. Yes, New York City matters, but we still have a job to do down in Atlanta. And yes, Corey Burke didn't look great against Atlanta in his 45 minutes he played. Kasper, he's in top form right now with 4 goals in his last 4 games. Andre Blake, meanwhile, in 8 games against NYCFC, he only has 2 clean sheets in those games, with his last coming down at the MLS's back tournament in that opening 1-0 win for the Union, which Jim Curtin mentioned, we don't even count that game in our stats, because he said, I think the temperature on the field was 104 degrees. It was a 10 o'clock game. He's like, both teams were just happy to be playing soccer out there. Like, we were lucky to get a win, but we don't look at that game at all. He said, doesn't matter. We play that game, but realistically, we were just happy to get it on the field. And so hearing Jim Curtin say they're going to rotate 3 to 4 guys, he said specifically, too, that guys that have played every single minute expect to get rotated out. So I was looking at the roster. Well, that would mean Kasper Schmelko would sit out. But with the form that he's in, does Jim really want to risk that? Maybe not. But I do think that Kasper probably will sit out and make an appearance later on in the second half. So I think Sergio Santos and Corey Burke will get the start up top. I think Anthony Fontana will start at the 10 in place of Jamiro Montero, who in retrospect will go back to his normal position as the number 8 on the left side of the diamond. El Brujo as the number 6, because he has a yellow card, so he'll miss that Atlanta game. So just to keep his fitness levels up, I expect him to still start at the number 6. Ali Bedoya, he's 34 years old, just turned 34, and you don't want his minutes to get up there, but at the same time, he is the captain. So I don't know if he will rotate. I expect that Ali Bedoya, we will see him. Kai Wagner, I think we're still seeing the back at the left back spot. Jack Elliott, I don't think we'll be starting this game. I think it's going to be Jacob Glesnes and Stuart Finley for his debut for the Philadelphia Union in the starting 11. And then Mbizo and Blake to finish out that lineup. But like I said, it is good that we recorded this right after Jim Curtin's press conference, because I didn't think Jim would make 3 to 4 substitutions. Now, maybe he was just feeding us that information and hoping that it gets out there for the New York City side of things and they plan for a different lineup. But these coaches, they're planning for everything out there. So I don't really think that was too much of a smoke screen for Jim Curtin to say. But Kasper Schmelzer, I think that is an interesting one. He has played every single minute. He's looked great in CCL play, not so much in MLS. Corey Burke, like I said, didn't look great against Atlanta, so does he warrant another start? Maybe not, but Jim sees these guys in practice every single day, so that's my expected lineup. Real quick, then, my 3 keys to victory for the Union. 1, how to stop Maxi Morales. He's been the thorn in the side against the Union in 7 games. He has 3 goals, 6 assists against the Union. The Union did a good job in containing Morales and MLS's back, but again, Jim Curtin said that game doesn't matter, so let's just throw that game completely out the window. Morales, he's coming off an impressive game against FC Cincinnati where he registered an assist, had 5 key passes, touched the ball 73 times and was fouled 3 times by FC Cincinnati. So it's obvious to me that if NYCFC want to have success, get Morales on the ball. Get him his touches so he can find Castellanos making those runs. Let him find Thiago making those runs out wide for NYC. So that's point number 1. 2, don't fall asleep on set pieces. Both goals for Inter Miami scored against the Union off of set pieces. The defenders got caught ball watching, like we talked about. 5 set piece goals for NYCFC. Jim Curtin did talk about that a little bit in his press conference. He said, "Yeah, they're a good set piece team, but they're also good at going 1-on-1 versus you." So that is the scary thing about NYCFC. They have multiple ways they can beat you. And point number 3, you got to finish your chances. Obviously, the Union finished the chances against Atlanta on Tuesday night, but against Inter Miami, they had 13 shots, 3 shots on target, and only 1 of those were goals. And over the years, I'd say NYCFC has been a strong defensive team. And so whenever NYCFC does make a defensive mistake, the Union have to be on top of those miscues and have to make NYC pay for their mistakes. But because I heard Jim say he's going to make 3 to 4 changes to that lineup, I do think NYCFC is going to come into Subaru Park on Saturday night and take a 2-1 victory.
Oh, wow. Okay. I was taking notes furiously until you told me that it might be a smokescreen, and then I felt like I've wasted my time. The thing about Philadelphia, it's a really good team. The fact that the Union were able to lose 2 of their best players from last year in Aronson and McKenzie to go to Europe and thrive in Europe so far, which is fantastic to see. And that the team doesn't look like it's lost a step is just amazing to watch. And kudos to Philadelphia, kudos to the academy that keeps on bringing players in and these players succeeding. Anthony Fontana is a guy to watch. I really enjoyed watching him play. He just has like a lot of skill, a lot of vision. And he's going to be one of these young kids to watch and to see, how far he's going to be able to get. He's going to be worth the price of admission one day. And so I really like what's going on. I would say to you and to your Union fans, enjoy Jim Curtin while you have him. Mm-hmm. Because he's no longer a secret, okay? Now that he's had a few weapons to play with, aside, that Philadelphia isn't going on the cheap all the time, trying to get talent and not spend a lot of money, okay? Now that they've upgraded the talent a bit, and then the academy kids coming up and being so good as well, okay? They're going to be, especially with Jesse Marsch's success in Austria and now going to Germany, there are going to be a lot of teams that are going to start looking at MLS and young MLS coaches, American coaches, to see if they're going to be able to replicate the success that Jesse Marsch has. And to me, the first guy that they're going to look at is Jim Curtin. And so, and I think that Jim Curtin, if he ever does make that leap over to Europe, he'll succeed there as well. I really do. I think he's a great coach, and you guys should enjoy him and admire him and pick his brain as much as you can, because at some point he's going to be gone. And then you'll be able to root for him wherever he is, wherever he's coaching. New York City, from New York City's perspective, don't fix what ain't broke. So they beat Cincinnati 5-0. Are they going to change their lineup around? Alfredo Morales has come in and played very well in a substitute role so far. Does Ronny Delia decide does he want to give him a start already? Malte Odmundson was brought here to be the starting left back, okay? Does Goody hold on to his job, or does he make the switch already? Goody scored a goal, and actually he's playing much better than he did last year. But then again, it wasn't hard to play much better than he was last year because he wasn't all that good last year. But he said that he worked, so he was part of the interview. He was part of the players that they allowed us to talk to, and he said yesterday that he didn't feel comfortable last season, that he wasn't in the type of shape, and that he worked out, that he went home to Iceland, and he worked out with a personal trainer throughout the entire off season to build his endurance, to build his resistance, to build his technical skill. And I think that we've seen an improvement from him, and now he's going to try to fight off and try to get as many minutes as possible. So the Taty Castellano situation, it was going to make or break this week. That was the situation with him. It was going to be absolute make or break. He was either going to Palmeiras or he's staying in New York City. Well, Ronny told us he's staying in New York City. So that means he's staying and he's starting. So that much we know. Aside from that, it's the first time that New York City is facing a diamond midfield. So does that mean that he makes adjustments to counter that? Or does he basically say, hey, this is who we are, freaking deal with it? So it's going to be interesting to see what Ronny Delia decides to do with his lineup, and if he keeps it the same, makes some adjustments, or or what I mean by wholesale adjustments, formation, players, etc., or basically keeps it pretty much the same, and then during the game decides to adjust. One of the great advantages that New York City has over most teams in MLS is that they've got players that can play a multitude of positions and play them well. So New York City can start in a classic 4-2-3-1, which is basically what they've done. They can switch to a 4-3-3 on the fly. They can switch to a 3-4-3 on the fly, to a 3-5-2. Well, they can't really do a 3-5-2 because they don't have a second striker. But the other ones they can definitely do on the fly. They don't have to go to the bench. It's just a matter of him putting up three fingers, and all of a sudden teams will move around. James Sands leaves midfield, goes to the back of the defense. The two wing backs, go up. I mean, it's just shifts, bingo, and they're done. Not every team can do that. No. And so that's what makes New York City one of the harder teams to play in MLS, because they can go through all those rotations without having to go to their bench to be able to make those changes. And not every team can do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Roberto, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. And for any Union fans not going to the game, and like you said before we got on here, unfortunately, the Union don't have a Spanish broadcast side of things. So any Philadelphia Union fans that want to hear some Spanish soccer, where can people listen to the broadcast?
Okay, so it's actually very easy. All you have to do is go to nycfc.com/radio. And you'll be able to see the button that says Spanish. You'll touch that, and it'll take you straight to the tune-in station. And by the way, we're not absolute homers on the radio, so you'll get a pretty much, more New York City point of view, but you'll get a down-the-middle broadcaster. Look, I've been a national broadcaster for ESPN for 25 years, for ABC, for CBS, God knows for who else. And so we cover both teams. We're not just on one, and we never talk about the team in first person. It's always third person. We're here to observe. We're not part of it. So that's the way we call the game. And as far as the rhythm, it's a little bit of a hybrid of Spanish English. We're not yelling all the time, but we're describing, painting a picture. I come from the Marv Albert school of broadcasting that way. So when you see the goals or something on TV or on Twitter later on, because you were listening to the game, it's almost like, oh yeah, I remember that, even though you didn't see it. So that's the way we approach things. And if people want to follow me, they can on Twitter at Rob Abramowitz. My Facebook page is Roberto Abramowitz Oficial with one F and not two, because it's Spanish. And then I'm on Instagram as well at Roberto Abramowitz. So people can follow me there, and love a good debate.
Absolutely. Hey, that's what makes you one of the best in the game, Roberto, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast today. But if you guys are following the podcast, follow @FreeKickPod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Check out the website, thefreekickpodcast.com. And we will see the result after these two teams take against each other. And we'll discuss that game on Sunday. But until then, my name is Todd, and this is the Free Kick Podcast.